I think as well, like one big thing that we push heavily is transparent accountability, right? I think from a provider perspective, you should really want to be that transparently accountable person who demonstrates in terms of take you to an appointment, right? So Dan, my nephew Dan, he's semi-verbal, but he'll go to a GP appointment today with a support worker and we'll come out of that and I'll go, how'd you go at the doctor's, mate? Good. What'd you talk about? And then you'll say to the support worker, hey, mate, what happened in there? Oh, I was... They talked about some staff and, because they're not generally that engaged like a family member would be.
Yeah.
But if they know they have to go, hey, I took Dan to a GP appointment today, these were the 4 items of topics that were discussed, they're going to pay a little bit more attention in that meeting, right? So if they have to have that transparent accountability around there, it creates more value to their job. It should uplift a support worker to feel like they're contributing more to that person's outcomes. But again, importantly, we get the information that we need in order to help in on that journey to make sure that the care provisions are great.
Every SIL provider knows the challenges: compliance, rosters, claims. But what if you could work smarter, grow faster, and make a bigger impact? Welcome to SILosophy, where we have real conversations about what it takes to succeed in supported independent living. This podcast is powered by Tania Gomez Consulting and Resolve. Let's get into it.
So welcome to SILosophy. Today I am joined by Scott Chapman from Able Digital Wellness. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we wanted to bring you in today to talk about this idea of creating the healthiest SIL homes. But before we jump into that, can you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and your journey and what you've been developing with Able Digital Wellness?
Absolutely. As you said, I'm Scott Chapman from Able. Able was a concept that we devised about 4 years ago. I have a nephew who resides in a SIL, and 5 years ago he wasn't in a SIL. He was still being raised by my mum and dad, and he was in a controlled environment there, obviously, where he had choice and control, but it was like living at home with your parents, right? You had choice and control as an elder teen, but if you were doing the wrong thing, someone had to pull you into line. So, Dan was more active and he ate well and he was in a really good space. And then when he transitioned into a SIL, that was our first experience with the disability sector, full stop. And although it was fantastic, he exercised choice and control very much so, as we all do when we leave home for the first time. And he stopped moving, he stopped exercise, he stopped being active. But even worse, his food consumption and behavioural outcomes significantly went downhill because of the lifestyle that he was living inside this SIL. And it was as COVID was sort of starting to arrive, we stopped and we were looking at his weight gain and his behaviour and all of these things that were reoccurring, and we really put it down to the fact that he wasn't moving anymore and he was eating terribly, and then as a result of those two things he was sleeping poorly. So a combination of those created a worse version of him, if you will, which created a terrible environment for his support workers because he was up and down from his behavioural perspective. So we thought we need to try and do something here to support the support staff to offer more healthier choice and control for him. Our first point of call was to try and go and get a mainstream fitness application, but unfortunately, twofold. Dan didn't have the cognitive capacity to understand the content within there, and physically it was too challenging. And on either side of him, his gateway to opportunity being his support staff, given that they weren't that exercise-minded either, they were looking at these platforms going, mate, we don't even get this, so how are we supposed to get him to get it?
Yeah.
And then the more we dug around to try and find disability-relevant content for movement and exercise and activity, there's a fair bit out there, but it was a YouTube link here, or it was someone had a link on a website or a video over here. But consistently finding resources in one spot just was non-existent, and that's where the idea was born. And it's been a journey, an absolute journey for the last 4 years, getting us to the point where we are now. But the focus was always single-handedly around Dan and what can I do to provide him a healthier opportunity, because he shouldn't have to become a statistic of early death just because he's got a disability.
Yeah, amazing. And what was your background before that? What was your career that gave you the skills to be able to run a startup like this?
I was just an ideas guy. I spent a lot of time in media. So I did 15 years in media with Southern Cross Austereo, Macquarie Media Group, in sales and marketing and general management roles. And then moved out of those roles into sport and acquisition type stuff and player management, and worked with a couple of boxers in America for a few years, which was really fun. And then decided I wanted to get out of all of that and still continue to do things that had a philanthropic nature to them, but that were potentially a little bit easier for me to run. So we went into food, believe it or not. I wasn't a food person, but we joined Zembreros as a franchise partner because they have a really good philanthropic side where they donate a meal for every time we sell a meal. And we're still in an 11-year journey with them, but we've then used the revenue that we're generating from there to fund the startup within Able to get our growth going from there. So we had the business experience, I had a bit of media and marketing experience, but most importantly for Able in particular, it was just the drive for change, right? Like we just wanted to make sure that we were able to help people that needed the help.
Wow, it's amazing. So tell me exactly what you can do with Able Digital Wellness.
Anything. No, the world is really your oyster with Able at the moment. We really are building a platform that's going to become the ultimate support worker and primary carer tool. So you can focus on a number of different things or you can channel down and focus on just one. But primarily it's built upon tailored exercise. So we actually map a client's movement ranges by answering a bunch of simple questions and watching videos. And then our exercise physiologists have mapped all of the content in the background. So then we can deliver progressive and regressive exercise plans directly relevant to your movement range. So whoever you are, wherever you are, even whether you have a disability or not, we can match exercise content, low impact exercise content to you. We then also have hundreds of dietitian prepared recipes, which enable support staff and primary carers to not just have to think about what's in front of them all the time. Because again, if I talk to Dan and I go, what do you want for dinner tonight, mate? He's going to go chicken carbonara every single night. He'll have chicken carbonara for breakfast, but we all know we can't have chicken carbonara breakfast, lunch and dinner. And as a support person, it's challenging sometimes to continually think of what can I offer somebody. So dietitian prepared recipes gives you more choice. We have yoga, breathing, wellness exercises, different reporting outcomes. There's a whole raft of content that allows you to basically tailor it to your client's needs or pick and choose what's going to be relevant for you to try and deliver healthier outcomes.
And how does this directly help or assist the SIL providers? What's the angle there? So we've talked about support workers. We know it's going to be easier for support workers to do their work. We've talked about the participant, but as the owner of a SIL business, whether they have one home or 10 homes or 100 homes, what's the benefit for them? Yeah,
it's a super good question. And if I can take you on a little bit of a journey, I said to you at the start, I'm a long-winded answer, so you're about to get one of those. So in the beginning, like Able, when we built it, whenever you build something, you go, this is the best thing in the world, right? Everybody has to have it. It's amazing. It's going to change lives. But there still has to be a commercial benefit for everybody. Yeah. Otherwise, just servicing the client's best outcomes, unfortunately, isn't always, the top priority because you have to be able to pay for it and substantiate it. So Able in the early stages went from being a really cool platform that had a heap of great content, and that was sort of it. And we were a nice to have, not a necessity. So we were trying to break down what do we need to do here in order to get on that shopping list of being more of a we must have this item rather than this would be a nice to have if we had the funds to. So we started working heavily with Griffith Uni and doing some research in and around the benefits in general, but also the benefits for somebody with a disability who is meeting minimum activity levels each week, reducing sugar consumption, improving sleep, and the outcomes of that were less behavioural incidences. Now, if you're a support worker and or a provider who employs those support workers and you've got a house that is reducing the amount of negative behavioural incidences that occur in that house, naturally you're going to have happier staff, right? If you have happier staff, your staff retention remains a lot easier. If you retain your staff longer, the care outcome ultimately becomes better because there's a better relationship and more consistency formed in your care. If your clients are happier with their support staff because they feel like they're part of the family, they're going to be happier. They're happier, support are happier, and it creates this full circle. So from a provider perspective, what we really worked on, in particular with Aruma, who's one of our largest clients, is if we get the houses to be more harmonious and more relationship focused, all centered around activity, exercise, and nutrition, then we can improve staff retention, which is a huge cost saving in the industry, and we can also improve client retention and vacancy rates. Because again, as a family member who sits outside a SIL looking in, I never visited my nephew's SIL that much. He had other housemates and that was their environment. So I didn't always feel comfortable going into what is their house as well. So whenever I caught up with Dan, it was outside. So unintentionally, I could sit there and go, what are you guys even doing in there? Are you feeding him well? Are you looking after him? So the reporting functionality within Able gives me an insight into the house as well in terms of what's happening and all the good and the bad. So you build a better relationship with the provider at the same time. So from a client retention perspective, if the family members are on the outside going, this is awesome, they're sending him a report on how they're meeting his NDIS goals, how much activity he's doing, they're focusing on preventative health outcomes, he's eating better, and he's doing all of these independence building activities in the community, they're an awesome provider and someone who I want to make sure he remains with. So although Dan will always have input into the decision in terms of where he lives, cognitively he's never going to come to me and go, I don't want to live here anymore, I want a new home. That decision will ultimately be a combined one, but it'll be driven by us as well in terms of how happy we are with the care outcomes. So knowing that somebody's doing this, knowing that somebody is focusing on that and then reporting that through to us as well means that we're happier. So going back to the question, which was, how does this benefit providers? If we can reduce staff churn and we can reduce resident churn and improve the happiness not only of the clients but the people who are placing them in the care, then you're going to get efficiencies across the board.
I guess it's also a really great marketing message, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
Talking about, if they could say this is the healthiest SIL home or we run the healthiest SIL homes in Australia, that's quite a different marketing angle. And it really is then almost differentiating the type of participant potentially that you get. You have someone, and I think health is important for every participant, but I think there are some family members who value that very highly. And some others that maybe it's not on their radar as much. They want to have a nice life, but they never maybe thought maybe being healthy might not be something they can articulate that they want for their child.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important for everybody. But that marketing message from a differentiator is really important because there's so many SIL providers out there. And when you can't market based on a price, when the pricing is set, and you might be looking at, if pricing is set, then the next thing is maybe it's location. So, within a location, maybe they're willing to travel within 20 kilometres maybe. So then you've narrowed it down, but that might still give you 10 maybe SIL options that you've got in that radius, depending where you're located. And so then how do you narrow them down after that?
Absolutely.
I guess it's who's got availability. How aesthetically pleasing is the house is something that personally I would look for. But then having something like this really does give you the point of difference.
I think as well, like one big thing that we push heavily is transparent accountability, right? Like as a provider, you should want to send me a report daily or weekly that goes, this is what we have done with your family member today. And there's going to be days where it's not a lot, right? But again, you could nearly ask anybody who has a family member that has a provider that's providing care somewhere along the lines, and what's your biggest frustration? And it's like, if I walk past, support workers on a phone scrolling and he's sitting at a cafe looking around, right?
Yeah.
Dan might have chose to do that. But at the same time, I go, all right, what do we do when we don't know what to do, right? It's not as simple as, you want to play PlayStation today, Dan? Cool. All right, you go and play your PlayStation and we're going to do some paperwork in the office. And, the content that we have within Able and the content that we're continuing to build out gives you resources of things to do when you don't know what to do. And what we want to really create is this environment where it doesn't always have to be focused on preventative health or exercise or nutrition. But, we were having a discussion prior to talking here around art therapy and music therapy and even just how do I build a garden in the backyard and grow my own veggies, and then how do I take those veggies and use them in my kitchen? There's a whole raft of independence building activities and exercises that we can undergo in SIL. The biggest challenge is the support staff in some cases just don't have the experience or the resource to go, I wouldn't know how to build a garden. I've never planted a veggie crop in my entire life. So how on earth am I going to go and do it with him? It's like, press play on this video and we'll show you the tools that you need to get. We'll show you the little garden thing you can buy from Bunnings and the stuff to put in it. And then we'll show you a recipe that you can make from that in the kitchen. There's days of independence building there. And I think from a provider perspective, you should really want to be that transparently accountable person who demonstrates, we're going to tell you when we're doing good. We're going to show you when things aren't so great, because we know that if Dan has a negative behavioural outcome, if I put that in a report and it goes to Scott, I can jump on the phone and go, dude, you can't throw a remote control at a support worker. Don't do that again. Talk to me what's going on here. Whereas they can't necessarily go, don't throw that at me again. So it's also about, just that communication piece around how can we all be more involved in the full turn circle care journey for that person. And that is, again, what we're trying to deliver there. So it's a great marketing message. Again, another long-winded answer, I'm sorry.
I think it really fits with this whole idea of lifting the expectations as well, right? So what you're doing is lifting the expectations of what SIL is and maybe what it could or should be. I think we've come a really long way. The NDS has only been around 11 years, I think it is. It's come a really long way in 11 years from the old group home type model, although that's still a little bit there. But there is a long way to go. And what I love about what you're trying to do here is that I think very often people are happy just with the status quo, or we're providing SIL. Somebody comes in, they take them to their appointments, they bring them home, but it's that quality of that interaction. And what you're doing is filling those gaps to really try and make it as simple as possible to provide better care.
Yeah. And then report on that better care, right? Because the point that you just made then is perfect in terms of take you to an appointment, right? So Dan, my nephew Dan, he's semi-verbal, but he'll go to a GP appointment today with a support worker, and we'll come out of that and I'll go, how'd you go at the doctor's, mate? Good. What'd you talk about? And then you'll say to the support worker, hey, mate, what happened in there? They talked about some staff and, because they're not generally that engaged like a family member would be.
Yeah.
But if they know they have to go, hey, I took Dan to a GP appointment today, these were the 4 items of topics that were discussed, they're going to pay a little bit more attention in that meeting, right? So if they have to have that transparent accountability around there, it creates more value to their job. It should uplift a support worker to feel like they're contributing more to that person's outcomes. But again, importantly, we get the information that we need in order to help in on that journey to make sure that the care provisions are great.
It reminds me a lot of my first year as a teacher. As a teacher, you learn all these things in uni, and I did TAFE and then I did uni. But going into the classroom for the first time, you have all these ideas, but then there's often that you don't actually know a great activity to teach something. I was early childhood, so let's talk about teaching to write your name for the first time.
Yep.
But then you meet a teacher who is been doing it for 10 years, and they give you all of their stencils, and back then they would give you a actual hard copy book, and you would go through and take them and photocopy them. So it almost seems like an online version of that. It's that resource hub, that resources of, these are tried and tested things that you can do in that situation, which means that as a new support worker, and many support workers are unqualified, or many people fall into disability without a whole lot of experience and qualifications. They do it because they're drawn to it, or they fall into it some other way. And there's often, like, even I taught the Cert 3 of individual support for many years, and even in that qualification, there's nothing that tells you how to engage someone in in fitness or in health or in engaging activities. In the childcare qualifications that I also teach, we actually do whole lessons on how to make musical instruments and why music's important. Like it's quite a different kind of thing. But as a support worker, you probably never thought about the fact that this person might like music, and what's 10 ways I can incorporate music to get them up and out, and using their area of interest. Again, my first year being a early childhood teacher, I worked with children with autism, and I did everything through play because we're taught about using play. But then I had to go and create these resources for, this beautiful boy that I worked with for many years, his name was Patrick, is still Patrick. He loved the Wiggles, and he had ASD level 3. He was non-verbal. He would bite 10 children a day to the point that they were bleeding. So the school wanted to expel him, but instead I became one-on-one support with him. And everything we did, I couldn't get him to do anything unless it was Wiggles. So I used to make matchboxes with different colours, and he would have to say one colour to open it to get the toy out. And then it was 2 colours. Then he would have to say a sentence. And over a period of years, we got him to use whole sentences. But it was all about using a tool to help him actually figure out where he's at and provide resources about what he wants to do. And this idea of choice and control I know is really important, but often people with disability don't know what their choices are.
Spot on.
So how do they say, I like gardening, if they've never gardened? How do they say, I want to go fishing, if they've never been fishing?
They also don't understand the consequences of their choice sometimes as well. Dan was drinking 4, 5, 6 Monster energy drinks a day.
Yeah.
He has no concept of what the negative outcomes of doing that are.
Yeah.
My son, who's 11, would try and start that, and then I'll go, mate, this is what will happen if you continue to do that, and he'll cease.
Yeah.
Dan won't. And to talk to a couple of the points you had there, Tania, you're spot on, right, in that we've got some content on there where a speech pathologist talks about how do you introduce new food to someone. And firstly, I naively went, why am I talking to a speech pathologist about this and not a dietitian?
Yeah.
And then the speech, she sat down and she's like, okay, so in order to introduce new foods, we want to talk about what the kind of food is. We want to talk about the texture. We want to talk about how we think it might feel once it goes in our mouth. Is it going to be juicy? Is it going to be dry? Is it going to be crunchy? Talk about all of these things so we can actually get a cognitive, thought process around what this food item is going to be, what I think it's going to taste like, so it removes some of the fear and anxiety around trying a new food. So I sat down, like we have share plates and try plates, and I'm like, this makes so much sense, because if he's never tried a grape before and you bite into a grape for the first time and it's all juicy and it's like smooth on the outside but crunchy on the inside, it's like, what is this I'm eating? But if we talk about, or understand how can I introduce this food and talk about it, it removes that anxiety. And even then down to, as you're mentioning, people, when you have a tendency to fall into disability support work now, and it's actually easier to get a yellow and blue card than it is an RSA, believe it or not, which is quite terrifying still at the moment. But one of the roadmap items for Able, and we're working with 2 companies at the moment, is to provide short form upskilling content directly matched to your client. So the whole premise of Able is built around your client's profile. So your movement range, your dietic requirements, your triggers, your disability categorization, and all of the content that we want that person to then receive should be centered around their profile and who they are. More importantly, all of the upskilling content your support staff then receive should also be centered around what your requirements are. Because it's wonderful to go out and do a cert 3, 4, this and that, and you learn, 100% of the content, and then you go into a SIL environment with a cognitively disabled 24-year-old, and you need about 3% of that, because all of a sudden, all that bookwork's out the window. So if I can deliver short-form content relevant to aggression management, conflict resolution, communication strategies, because communication strategies with Dan are going to be different to Patrick, who you were just referring to there.
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
disability categories, different requirements, different triggers. So, but if I'm the same support worker bouncing between houses with no training prior to that, how do I best serve these people so that I enjoy my day and they do as well? And
even with training, right? It's experience that gets you to understand, and everyone's so individual.
Yeah.
So being able to map those things to an individual's needs is, really spot on. And I feel like with that type of resource, it's just supporting everybody, really, isn't it? It's taking away all of these blockers to how do we provide good care.
Yeah.
It's hard to provide good care because, if we look at the literature around support workers tend to have lower qualifications. They tend to maybe not be as experienced. They tend to there's a big, as you said, a big turnover of staff. So even if you did train the staff you've got, they're likely to turn over anyway.
Yep.
So you've got all of these challenges around support workers, and then you've got the challenge that every single participant has its own needs and its own, especially if you're talking about range of movement, what every single person, they're on their own journey. So being able to teach that does need a whole lot of skill. So really what you're doing is contextualizing all of these different qualifications or skill levels, or I don't actually even know what you would call them, competencies. And then you're distilling that into, okay, let's map this person's ability with walking. Can they take 5 steps, 10 steps? Can they lift their leg? How high can they lift their leg? And then what does that mean they can do within these exercise programs, so that you're giving them a customized experience. So I think, it's amazing that technology can do something like that.
Yeah, and look, it's never going to be 100% accurate, right? Because it's always going to be, this is a categorization, this is what a professional deems would be content relevant to categorization, rate as you choose, and its effectiveness and its fit. So even with our exercise programmers, if you then get delivered an exercise that's too challenging, you rate it and say it was too hard, and it will regress you then to an easier exercise in that program next time round. But you're right again in the support worker realm, right? I think there's about 80,000 support workers required by the end of 2026 in order to currently meet demand. And we were talking to one of our providers the other day about recruitment strategies and how and where they're finding their people. And they were saying 2 to 3 years ago, you would never get a job with them unless you had adequate qualifications and experience. Now, if you have empathy and a smile, you're in. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you have to understand that the alternative is way worse, right?
Yeah.
If we don't have staff, or we're just constantly using, a churn of agency staff, the outcomes are never going to be great. So we have to get in who we can, and we have to try and train them on the job as fast as we can in order to get the outcomes. And that's where that churn's coming in. It's like a 25% churn out of the industry now.
Yeah.
So if we've already got a shortage and a massive churn, we have to not only fill the gap, but we've got to give people resources that make them comfortable in their job, that mean they can provide care that doesn't then, blow back on them, if you will, so that again, that end user, being my nephew and everybody like him, gets the best outcome that they can.
Yeah, it's amazing. What is your vision for the future of Able? How do you see this evolving?
Oh, that's a dangerous question I ask. There's a very big roadmap ahead of us. Look, again, for me, we'll always be centered around preventative health, right? That's always where our base is going to be. But the more our business has grown and the more research we've done and the more conversations we've had with providers across the country, the more we're channeling down on detailed, tailored content to support the support worker. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to forget about individuals at home who want to use our platform or are never going to be in a SIL, because it's still completely adequate for them. But our real plan is around your support staff are your gateway to the world, or they're your biggest barrier. Generally, they're your biggest barrier, not because they come to work today and go, I'm going to be a barrier. It's because they come into work today and going, I don't exactly know what I need to do. And if we can get Able into every single SIL house in the country with the content that we have now and the content of where we're going, we know for a fact that we can improve scheme outcomes, Medicare outcomes, but importantly, preventative health and life outcomes for that individual. And again, it all centres around upskilling people as quickly as we can, getting them, making sure they're healthy, fit and active, pathwaying them into sporting programs within community environments, but really just giving people the tools to make sure that that person with a disability in their care has the same opportunities afforded to you and I.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That was actually the shortest winded question that I've given you, Tania,
Yeah,
because it
I'm
could have been very
surprised.
big. There's a lot of roadmap items that we're working on, but it's all time and resource.
Yeah. Now, you are one of our sponsors for the SIL Summits that are running in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth in May and June. What are you going to be talking on, and why should someone come and hear you speak?
We are going to be talking about creating healthy homes, because it is a huge thing. Like, again, it's not just about the health outcome. And, we want people to not just think about, we try and do healthy stuff now, right? Like the positive behavioural benefits for the individuals in your care, and then therefore the positive benefits to your staff are proven. We've got the data to show you that now. So I think you should come to these anyway, because there's fantastic content across the board. But in particular for what we're talking about, we're going to be talking about hints and tips in and around suggestive meals. How do you engage exercise? How do you pathway people into sport? How do you introduce sport? How can you upskill your support staff? How do you engage your families better in order to get them involved in the health and wellness journey of the people that we're providing care for? Because again, it's not just, I'm going to drop Dan to you and he's now your responsibility. It's still my obligation as well to make sure that he's happy and healthy. But, we really want to give people the tools to make sure that they are providing healthier opportunities and healthier choice and control. And it's not that easy. Again, you don't know what you don't know, right? And we believe that 99% of providers out there turn up with the best intention every single day. But if you don't have the resource and you don't have the know-how, then you can't deliver the outcome. So, we'll give a whole bunch of hints and tips on how to do that and show you how Able can work in to create healthier and happier homes.
That's great. And if someone's listened today and they're really interested and they want to know more, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
They can just email hello@abledigitalwellness.com.au. They can check me out on LinkedIn and contact there. If we have anybody listening who's interested in a capital raise, we'll also have a chat with you. We need to raise some funds next year. But yeah, look, go to our website, abledigitalwellness.com.au. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all the socials. We're there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap on this episode of SILosophy. If this resonated with you, take a second to subscribe and share it with someone in the SIL space who really needs to hear this. Don't forget to connect with Tania Gomez Consulting on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook for more resources, conversations, and support to help you grow your impact. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep making a difference.